Hello everyone, welcome to the previous year questions analysis by Bajirao IAS Academy. Today is 15th November 2023. As part of discussion, we have a few questions like now identity is now being seen as a problem. Okay, so the problem of identity is because of false ego. So false ego is the source of a identity. Identity has becoming a problem now. So we need to examine this statement. How false uh, ego is the result of identity. So that creating other problems. And the second question is about uh, an unexamined life is not worth living. That is given by Socrates. So in ethics, this particular statement has a very high relevance because time and again these questions were repeated. Okay, so in this context, we have to understand what is an unexamined life is not worth living. So what does it exactly mean? And the next question that we are going to discuss is about digital learning. So we all know during the pandemic times how digital learning has revolutionized access to education, especially to the poor and especially to the students who are living in rural areas. So in this context, we need to understand all the ethical issues which are involved in digital education. So what are the ethical issues which are involved in digital education? So what are the initiatives that were being taken by the government in this regard? So the first question is about the identity. Okay, so the problem of identity is created due to false consciousness. See, nowadays identity is becoming a source of conflict, a source of tension in the society and even misery. How? Because there's a communalism in society. So this is associated with the identity and even caste politics and caste discrimination, ethnic tensions that we have recently seen between the Maitis and the other communities within the state of Manipur. So therefore, the problem of identity has uh, given rise to several problems. So even if you see excessive regionalism that led to these secessionist movements in different parts of the world and even in India also. For example, the Khalistani movement, right? So therefore, there's no doubt that identity has been creating a lot of problems. So the false identity or the problem of identity is because of the false ego among the individuals. So in this context, we need to understand how false ego among the individuals have been leading to the problem of identity. Firstly, so it is better to start this answer with what some ancient scriptures say about this particular aspect. So you can even start with any thinker in the introduction and even any ancient scriptures which are specifically talking about this. So according to Advaita Vedanta, so it clearly says that our nature is Atma. Okay, so Atma is very often equated with our inner self, right? So Atma is our inner self. So Advaita Vedanta clearly says that our real nature is Atma. And now it is identification with our body, mind, and intellect that gives the false identity. So when Atma is being identified itself with the body, mind, and the intellect of an individual, that very often gives the false identity. So we are not able to understand our spiritual mind. So the ego, which is the hero of all miseries in life. So ego is not just the source of the problem of identity, but ego is also the hero of all miseries in life. Now, how the problem of identity is created due to ego. So this is what the essence of the question, and this is what we need to understand. So how the problem of identity is created due to ego. Now, please understand. So the false identity happen out of ignorance. So when people are ignorant, so they can develop the false identity about themselves. And that further leads to the problem of identity that we have already discussed. They include the secessionist movements, caste discrimination, communal violence. So all of these are considered as the problems of identity. So this primarily happen because of ignorance. When we associate ourselves with material elements, material things, so when our soul is filled with the ignorance, that led to the false ego, false identity. So just as darkness can be removed by the light, in a similar sense, so ignorance can be removed through the right knowledge. So several thinkers have emphasized on acquiring right knowledge, even Buddha himself. So through right knowledge, so we can remove ignorance so that we can understand our true self. Okay, so in this context, we can say that right knowledge is not one of the options that will help us removing sorrow. Rather, we can say that it is one of the most important and inevitable necessity. So that will help us gain absolute knowledge. Okay, so therefore we have to understand that right knowledge is very important. So when we have a right knowledge about the things, we will be free from the problem of identity, even false ego. And in fact, Bhagavad Gita has also emphasized on the problem of identity, and that is being created by false ego. So what Bhagavad Gita says? So Bhagavad Gita states that anyone through right knowledge, so anyone through right knowledge, so they can renounce their false identification. So they'll not have associate themselves with these false identities. So therefore, right knowledge will help us develop the right identities. However, in contemporary times, people have the lusty knowledge, a lusty intelligence. So the intelligence which is not used for the right purposes. So intelligence which is used for fulfilling their narrow benefits or the narrow material advantages. So in fact, this sort of intelligence very often influences the spirit soul. Okay, so every one of us have the spirit soul inside us, that is Atma, right? So the lusty intelligence influences the spirit soul to acquire the false ego. So this is the result of individualism, excessive commodification of things. So all these factors have been leading to the false ego. So we have been emphasizing more and more on the material things. So therefore, this further lead to identifying oneself with the matter, thus with the mind and senses. So that is where we have been developing the false identities. So in fact, so when the living entity like a particular individual is entrapped by material body or the material things, material elements, now it is often said that we uh, instead of loving our fellow human beings, we are loving things, right? So therefore we are now entrapped by the material body. So we are now identifying oneself with the bodily relationships as well. So we have been forgetting own identity as a spiritual soul. So this all factors will further lead to developing false ego, and false ego is the source of problem of identity. So identity has been a major source of conflict, tension, and misery in the society. So in fact, the this false ego that people have been developing is associated with different modes of material nature. So what sort of a material nature? In fact, our senses, which we already have, will become attached to these modes of material nature. So we have been attaching to the material things. We have been neglecting our spiritual aspect of it. And that is where we have been developing a false ego. And that ultimately results in the problem of identity. So in fact, the interaction of the material modes is the cause of false identification. So within us and outside us, there's an interaction of the material mode of things. So that has been resulting in false identification of ourselves, our societies, our regions, and our religions. So this false identification, no doubt, results in a tension in the society. Okay, so as a human beings, we have been emphasizing more on the material elements. So material elements, emphasis on material elements often leads to the problem of identity, the problem of developing false ego about oneself. So this false ego is the cause of identifying body and mind. Okay, so please understand, it seems like a bit difficult, but this is very easy. So false ego is being developed among people is because they lack knowledge, they lack right knowledge. Since people are preferring the material aspects, that has resulted in a sense of ignorance among the people, so they are not able to understand the true self. And when pure consciousness is polluted by material contamination, when we are contaminating our pure consciousness by material contamination, and even identifying uh, the body with the material things, it is very important for us to identify those false ego so that we can escape ourselves from the identity, the problem of identity, tension, violence, and conflict in the society. So that is what this question has been emphasizing on. So when you write a conclusion for this question, so we have made of spiritual energy. So we are not made of any material aspects, material elements. Our interpersonal relations and intrapersonal relationships are guided by the spiritual energy. So this means we are eternal and we are conscious of what we are doing. So therefore, when we compare the spiritual energy with the material things, spiritual energy is considered as superior. And when we have that spiritual energy, when we have our own consciousness, so that will result in eliminating the problems of identity, the problems of developing the false ego among the people. Okay, so in fact, the material things are temporary, so they are not permanent, but we are increasingly attached to those material elements, and that is how we have been developing the false consciousness or the false ego. So false ego is the most subtle feature, and it is considered as inferior, and it is very often associated with the material elements and material aspects, and that has been leading to the problems of identity. So getting rid of the false ego will not just result in eliminating the problems with which are associated with the identity, and it also results in creation of a compassionate and a caring society, so that is free of social evils. So what are the social evils? Caste discrimination is a social evil, and gender discrimination, gender inequality, is also a social evil. Communal violence. So all these factors are social evils. So we in order to get rid of all these social evils, in order to create a compassionate and a caring society, it is very important that we should get rid of the false ego. We should get rid of the problem of identity. So this is how you can emphasize on the conclusion for this question. So the next question, that is it is about a quote that is being given by Socrates. The unexamined life is not worth living. So this is given by Socrates. So who is Socrates? Socrates was an ancient Greek political philosopher, right? So he has given a quote that an unexamined life is not worth living. So this means that as a human beings, our life have to be examined, or we have to examine things. So don't take it as it is. Rather, we have to examine everything. So that is the essence of this statement. So when we examine every aspect, that is the essence of being a human, right? So Socrates was an ancient Greek political philosopher. So in fact, Socrates is considered as the father of ethics and inquiry. Okay, so he had the distinction, and he is called as a father of ethics and inquiry. So according to his beliefs, according to the opinion of the Socrates, one develops ethics through maturity, wisdom, and love. So what Socrates has said, so he said that developing ethics is very important. But how ethics will be developed? It is developed through a maturity of an individual, the kind of a wisdom he already had, and through the value of love. So with through these factors, ethics can be inculcated among an individual. So in fact, Socrates has introduced the concept of teaching ethics and acceptable standards of conduct. Even in 400 BC, it is also very important that how a human conduct should be. So what was the way of a human conduct? So he developed the concepts like teaching ethics and also the acceptable standards of conduct. So that means what ought to be, what ought to be. So how a human being should conduct. So that was developed in 400 BC. And in fact, Socrates had a profound and lasting impact on the course of entire Western philosophy and even history ever since. So, in fact, Socrates is considered as the guru of Plato. Okay, so Plato is a disciple of Socrates. So, we do not directly know about Socrates, rather, what we know about Socrates is through the dialogue of Plato. Okay, so in fact, how we can interpret the statement? What is the statement? The statement is unexamined life is not worth living. So how can we interpret the statement, about statement? So it is important to use our highly developed faculty. So as a human beings, we have the faculty of thinking, so the faculty of using reason. So whenever we confront with some situation, or whenever we think about any issue, so therefore it is very important for us as human beings to use our highly developed faculty of thought to raise our existence above that mere creatures. Okay, so we have to rise our own existence above that of a mere creatures. So we are not just a creature, so we are more than that. So in order to prove that, we have to use our highly developed faculty of thought, and that is the difference of human beings and animals. So what he says was simply eating, sleeping, and working along with procreation, so they cannot distinguish us from animals. So, we have been eating, sleeping. So that is not the basic difference between human beings and animals. But the basic difference between humans and animals is we have to use our highly developed faculty of thought. So that is the essence of this statement. Because if we don't think, so if we don't interpret the aspects which we confront with in our daily lives, it is not worth living. It is obviously not worth living, and this is what the opinion of Socrates on this issue. So, in fact, according to him, an examined life actually helps in delivering love, hatred, and generosity, joy at the right time and right place to the all deserving stakeholders. So, in every aspect, on every issue, there are different stakeholders. Okay, so an examined life will help in delivering love, hatred, generosity, and joy at the right time, right place, and to the deserving stakeholders. So, this is what the view of Plato, the view of Socrates with respect to the quote that unexamined life is not worth living. However, the rigorous examination of life should not be encouraged. So, even though he emphasized on the examination of life, but he make a certain distinction that a rigorous examination of life should not be encouraged. So, it should not be encouraged. Why? Because it also associate, or it also comes with several negative effects on both people and entire society. Okay, so however, the rigorous examination is not being, so the rigorous examination is not at all supported by the Plato, because it has several negative effects on the individual who have been examining things, and even the society as well, because it endanger both the life of the examiner and entire society will be will face the problem. So if everyone examining the society at different levels, okay, so someone who engages in a rigorous self-critical examination, they eventually entangle with it. So they cannot come out of this situation, so they entangle with it, and that will have a huge negative consequences on the life of examiner and also on the entire society. So, in fact, Socrates became entangled in dialectics. So, dialectics is a way, a method of a debate. So, that was being developed by Plato. Okay, so that was being developed by Socrates himself. But the way we know about dialectics is through Plato. Okay, so dialectics is a dialogue and a debate between the individuals. Okay, so because of Socrates dialectics, he became unpopular, and he, in fact, he was accused of corrupting the youth and eventually sentenced to death. So because of the dialectics and because of the examination of life, the rigorous examination of the life by Socrates, in fact, he was ordered to drink poison by the society at that time. Okay, so in this context, we need to understand the significance of self retrospection in human life. So, what is this significance of examining the things? So, as Socrates already said, that unexamined life is not worth living. So, therefore, in this context, what is the significance of an examined life? Significance of a self introspection in human life. So, Mahatma Gandhi's examination. So, you very often come across a book of Mahatma Gandhi, that his autobiography, My Experiments with Truth. So, this particular book has highlights that the significance on reflection of life, the significance of reflection on life. So this is what Mahatma Gandhi's My Experiment with Truth book is all about. So in fact, Mahatma Gandhi was not only able to map his weaknesses, so through the self retrospection, so through an examined life, Mahatma Gandhi was able to know about his weaknesses and vulnerabilities. So, because you have seen how Mahatma Gandhi has used non-violence and satyagraha in a very strategic manner. Okay, so in fact, the political scholars and historians went on to call Mahatma Gandhi as a strategist rather than a mere politician. So therefore he get to know about his weaknesses and vulnerabilities. Okay, so this is possible through a rigorous examine life of Mahatma Gandhi. Okay, so in fact, with the very same self retrospection, he was able to question his prejudices and understand the strength as a human being. So as a human being, what is the strength? So because of the limitations among human beings, he called off the non-cooperation movement when it is going out of control. So he also used the non-cooperation movement, civil disobedience movement, and even the Quit India movement at right and appropriate times. Okay, so whenever there is a truce period, so he used constructive programs like individual satyagraha. I mean, this is only possible through a life of an examined life. So that is what Gandhi has done, and because of that, he's one of the most successful in his fields. He was one of the most successful and influential individuals in the world. So, in fact, this very ability to reflect on life adds more depth to the character of Arjun. So, Arjun is one of the most famous character in Bhagavad Gita, in Mahabharata. Okay, so that the very same ability to reflect on life has added to the depth of character Arjun in Mahabharata. So it is most of the other characters. For example, in Mahabharata, there are other characters also. For example, Bhishma, Yudhishthir, and Kauravas. So what makes Arjuna significantly different from others is because his ability to reflect on his life. So that is what examining the life. So instead of following the norms and fighting with his clan, Arjuna himself questioned the meaninglessness of war. Okay, so he questioned on the battlefield itself. Arjuna questioned the meaninglessness of the war and purpose of his life. So if he's fighting his own clan, what is the purpose of his life? Okay, so this leads to a large scale violence, and in fact he also felt that wars are being meaningless. So we all know that Krishna has motivated Arjuna to be to fight against his own clan. So that is his dharma. Okay, a dharma of a kshatriya. Now in conclusion, you just write the significance and the essence of an examined life is not worth living. So how it is important in the contemporary periods. Okay, for example, the quality of questioning citizens, the governance, and the politicians and the political processes is very important to hold them accountable, hold the government officials and the political representatives accountable to the people. So therefore, examined life is very important even in the contemporary periods also. So you can conclude this on answer by emphasizing on the importance of this very same quote by Socrates in contemporary times. Okay, so the next question is with respect to digital methods of education. Now, after the COVID-19 pandemic, so digital education or e-learning has given a lot of importance because it is not possible to hold the physical classrooms or hold the physical classrooms and conduct classes to the students because of the threat of contact of this virus, the spread of the virus. So because of the COVID-19 pandemic, even in remote and rural areas, we have seen the penetration of internet, penetration of digital learning. So in this context, we have to understand the ethical issues which are involved in the digital learning. And in this context, do you think it is advantageous to the economically weaker sections of the society? So we have to write that, do you think the digital method of education is really benefiting the economically weaker sections of the society? So this is the second part of the question. So first understand the COVID-19 pandemic has dragged the traditional model of education. Okay, so the traditional model of education is a classroom setting, a school, and college. So that has resulted, that has brought into the crisis. Why? Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we were not able to hold the physical classes and the classrooms. So in this specific situation, online education or digital mode of learning has come to the rescue, or comes to the rescue of the education. Okay, so through digital mode of education, the classes were conducted from remote areas, and classes were also attended by the students from remote areas. Okay, so even before the pandemic also we have some kind of a digital method of learning. There were several digital initiatives that were already launched by the government before the pandemic itself. Okay, so however it has helped in inclusivity of education. So it has resulted in more and more access to education, especially better and quality education for the people who are living in remote rural areas, who are otherwise deprived of access to quality education. So however there are several ethical issues which are being involved with the digital mode of learning, digital mode or online mode of education. So these ethical issues have should also be fixed, or they should also be addressed. So in this context, we need to understand the ethical issues which are involved in digital learning. So what are the ethical issues which are involved in digital education? So first and foremost, we have to understand the exclusion and not inclusion. So how exclusion? Because now all students have not all students have access to these digital gadgets, access to internet. So even they don't know how to operate these digital gadgets because of the digital illiteracy. So because of this reason, this exclusion of people, especially the poor and underprivileged sections of the society, rather than inclusion of individuals. So this is the first and foremost ethical concern that has to be addressed. So it should be more inclusive. The exclusion errors should be minimized in providing education through digital modes of learning. Secondly, there have been rising inequalities. So we talk about the gender inequalities, the inequalities between different regions, and the inequalities between rural and urban areas, and income inequalities among the people, and inequalities between different communities. So rising inequalities have also becoming hurdles, barriers for children access to education through the digital mode of learning. Okay, for example, if students from a poor family, they cannot have access to internet, they do not have the electronic gadgets to watch these classes online, so we cannot provide quality education to children in those families. On the other hand, a student from rich families, they can easily access the education, the quality education. So therefore rising inequalities is also a challenge in providing quality education through digital mode. So after that, we should also understand the connectivity issues, internet penetration. So that is also very important, because now if you see in majority of the areas, majority of the regions, and especially remote hilly regions, they do not have access to internet, even though internet is cheaper, even though around 840 million people have access to mobile phones or using internet, but it is still a dream to take internet to the remote and hilly areas. So therefore, the connectivity has to be further improved. For example, the BharatNet program has been launched with the aim of connecting all panchayats by broadband by the year 2022, but still the goal has not been reached. So after that, we should also understand the accessibility and quality of education issues. Okay, so there's also a difference between uh, 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 you know how what is the quality of education between of a children who have been in urban areas and in rural areas. So in fact, if you look at teachers who are government school teachers in rural areas, so they even do not have adequate amount of skill and knowledge how to operate these systems. So in this context, so it will result in several complications. Even children also do not get quality education because of digital illiteracy, lack of skills, and even lack of English skills. They cannot teach students in a better way. So after that, digital divide is another major challenge. So what exactly is a digital divide? So digital divide is a difference between the rural and urban areas and between men and women in accessing the digital gadgets, accessing mobile phones, accessing internet. So this is what the digital divide is. So in fact, the rural India has been suffering with the information poverty. Why? Because of digital divide. So if you look at the internet speeds in urban areas, it is much more faster than what we get in rural areas. So therefore, digital divide is one of the most challenging issue in digital education. So it further strengthens the vicious cycle of poverty, deprivation, and backwardness of the people, because students will not be able to get a better standards of education, quality education. So that led to the deprivation of learning outcomes of the people. So apart from that, there are also several issues. For example, the cost of internet, the cost of the gadgets. Even though several governments have provided these gadgets to the students on subsidy, but uh, the affordability of these gadgets and affordability of the internet are the major challenges, are the major ethical issues, and the difference between the rich and poor families in accessing quality education. All things have to be addressed in digital mode of education. So in this context, there are factors, so they have been affecting online education in India. Okay, so these factors can also be considered as ethical factors. So how they have been affecting online education in India. So firstly, the cost of online education is very high. Okay, so we can say that uh, education is provided for free of cost to every student through digital modes. But what about the gadgets that are required, and what about the cost of internet? So that is also important. Those factors should also be considered, because the poor families cannot invest enough amount of money on buying these gadgets and regularly investing in regularly buying or purchasing internet plans. Secondly, the lack of availability of quality education is another major challenge. So what about the employability? So because of poor quality education being imparted to children, of course their learning outcomes would be impacted. So that deteriorates their learning outcomes, and deteriorating learning outcomes means they will face the employability quotient. So how readily employable they are actually. And governments have launched various digital initiatives, but people lack awareness, knowledge about these digital initiatives. So how many students have awareness about these digital initiatives like Swayam, Diksha, Disha portals, right? So smartphone user base, even though smartphone user base is very high in India, but uh, uh, it is very low compared to a woman. Only less than around, I think, 25 percentage of women have access to internet, access to, even though they have access to mobile phones, but a very less number of people are digitally literate. And after that, internet penetration is the another major issue. So not all the regions are being connected with the internet and broadband. So if we do not connect with the internet, how can we provide quality education for all? So after that, the disposable income of families is also very important due to COVID-19 pandemic. So the disposable income has got affected because of unemployment, the problem of unemployment, and there are several other issues, and because of the lockdown. So all these factors have impacted the disposable income of the families. For example, rich family can afford quality education for their children. However, the poor families cannot have adequate disposable income and they cannot afford quality education for their children. So we have young population, and that is the essence of demographic dividend. So therefore, providing quality education is the essence, because that improves our economy. So that creates a knowledge empowered society. So that is being envisioned by India as we are in the time of Amrit Kal. So after that, the cost of education should also be taken into consideration. So these are the factors that have been impacting online education in India. So after that, so what are the initiatives which are launched by the government to promote digital education? So the government has launched e-Vidya program. Okay, so what is e-Vidya program? It will enable digital and online air access to education. Okay, firstly, and secondly, this will benefit more than 25 crore school going children. So around we have 25 crore school going children, and it will benefit 25 crore school going children. So apart from this program, the government has also launched Diksha. Okay, so what is Diksha? A digital infrastructure for knowledge sharing. So this will also facilitate quality digital learning for students. Secondly, the government has also launched Swayam. So Swayam is a online courses, so for school and higher education children. So after that, one earmarked TV channel per class from 1 to 12 has also launched by the government. And in fact, the government has been using extensive use of radio, community radios, for the post podcast of CBSE syllabus through Siksha Vani. And special e-content for visually and hearing impaired kids has also been provided through this program. So PM e-Vidya was launched. So it is bridging education learning gaps among the students during and after the COVID-19 pandemic. So PM eVidya was launched particularly after the COVID-19 pandemic, and it is aimed at bridging those gaps before and after COVID-19 lockdown. So as we have already discussed, so Diksha portal, Diksha is a digital infrastructure for knowledge sharing. Okay, so it provides e-content for school education and QR coded energized textbooks. Secondly, Sikshavani. This is a community radio and radio program to podcast the syllabus, CBSE content and the syllabus. Okay, so after that, digitally accessible information system for visually impaired and other individuals. So the government has also launched Swayam Prabha TV channel. So Swayam Prabha TV channel is all about learning, is also providing digital learning. So in this context, when you write the conclusion, digital education is a very useful, yet it is not completely successful in India. So why it is not successful? Because of all these factors that we have already discussed. So therefore, it is still a lot to do in terms of checking if students' entitlements are not being compromised, or in providing meaningful academic curriculum for alternatives. So therefore, whatever the factors, whatever the ethical challenges we have in providing education for the poor people, especially the economically weaker sections, has to be taken care of. So the second part of the question is about the how digital education really benefiting the students from the economically weaker sections. There are also two sides. Okay, so in fact, when we talk about the negative side of it, the cost of digital education has to be taken into consideration, and the economically weaker sections, so who have been living in remote rural areas where there is no infrastructure, where there is no connectivity. So that has to be taken care of. And in fact, several students from economically weaker section join the workforce at an early age. So that violates the child rights and will also increase the child labor. So that is, that is primarily because lack of access to quality education. So the digital mode of learning, we cannot provide midday meal scheme. Okay, it is only provided through the physical classrooms in schools. So we cannot provide the midday meal program. So what about the nutrition? So what about regular monitoring of students? Because if you look at the economically weaker sections of the society, parents rarely take care of children educational outcomes. So therefore regular monitoring of teachers is also very important. And digital learning would result in a less regulation of students or less monitoring of students by the faculty. So therefore there are both sides also when it comes to digital learning impacting the students from economically weaker sections. Okay, so that's it for today, and tomorrow also we will be discussing few ethics questions. Okay, so thank you.